Welcome to this week's edition of the 12th District. This is Kerry Condata. We'll be trying to get hold of your legislators later in the show. However, they are on the floor and may not be able to make it. We'll give it our best shot to at least get a few minutes with them. We call the show The Left, Unhinged and Unleashed, or Unleashed and Unhinged. I guess you could look and see which one you think it is. We'll let you decide. We're going to report on what's going on in Washington, D.C. It's unprecedented. The left moving their agenda through the House. Radical bills that have been held up for some time are being moved. And, of course, the attack on the president continues with subpoenas and questions for every person that was ever even near Donald Trump in the past 10 or 20 years. And, of course, the media is chiming right in with their blatant attack also on the president and anybody else that disagrees with the left for that matter. The right is basically under attack. And the Congress is not doing a whole lot about it. There's not a lot of movement, even though again, Democrats are moving the left agenda. The right seems a little bit frozen in its tracks. I'll come back and tell you more about the left when we return. Welcome back to the 12th District. Well, as we say, the left has either come unleashed or unhinged or both. The fact of the matter is they are wasting no time moving their entire laundry list of far-left bills, starting with the ending the Electoral College. There is a proposal to end the Electoral College and go to a national vote. Folks, if you understand why the Electoral College was put in place and how important it is, you would never support going to a popular vote. This would, of course, totally change the politics of the United States and certainly create a distinct advantage for the Democrats and the left, because the population centers, which typically are more blue and more Democrat, would control virtually every major national office. You can look at this way. In the last election, President Trump won 2,550 counties, and Hillary Clinton won 500. In the popular vote, Hillary Clinton edged him out. But you can see the difference geographically and why it's important to have an electoral college and why it was put in the Constitution and designed that way in the first place. It gives everybody a voice instead of just having some population centers like California, New York, or even Seattle, which are primarily far-left places, control everything. Of course, advantage to the left. Overturning Citizens United, another situation that was decided by the Supreme Court years ago that allowed corporations to act as independent folks when it came to donating money. And so the left likes to say that there's big money in politics. I think we'd all agree to that, even those of us that might be more centered would say that's probably true. I'm not sure we'd say it's a problem, but if it is, this doesn't solve it because it only really goes after the corporations. Where's the rest of the big money? Where is the money coming from on the left side? Well, you know, there's certain individual billionaire donors like Soros and Steyer that create a lot of havoc with their input. But the unions themselves have been the big players, especially here in Washington State. They are very dynamic here. And the fact is they are putting in just as much or more than the corporations. But this particular proposal doesn't address that. This would simply shut down corporations and certainly give an advantage to, yes, you guessed it, the left. Medicare for all. Well, we've talked about health care here, and it appears that the movement on the left is to go back to the 1930s, the ancient 1930s idea of a Medicare for all type of program, basically a single-payer government-funded program, but therein lies the rub. There is no suggestion of how it will be funded. There was lots of proposals on how it would be done, and some of them include no limits on health care and no deductibles. Can you imagine the demand curve on that? If you know anything about basic economics, you would see that that would make it quite costly, beyond your wildest dreams. The fact of the matter is, the greatest statement probably on health care is, if you want to see how expensive it'll get, make it free. That's exactly what they intend to do, and that is the worst delivery system we could possibly have with the technology and information we have now. Why go back to the 1930s? We could do so much better. All right. Let's see what else is on the list. There's lots. They intend on blocking any chance of getting a wall on the border. Yeah, that's right. We've got an immigration situation that is certainly very concerning. As a matter of fact, in February, more people tried to cross the border than at any time in the last 10 years. That's right. You're not hearing the MSNBCs of the world and the CNNs talking about it, but there is a significant crisis on the border and it needs to be dealt with. Frankly, it needed to be dealt with 40 years ago. It has been shoved to the side every year for so long, and now it has reached critical mass. The president is trying to do something, anything, to get an immigration plan and some control of the border. It is necessary because there are thousands of more people coming, and it is overwhelming, the entire border situation. But the Democrats don't seem to have a plan for immigration. They don't like ours, they don't like the wall, they don't like a lot of things, but they don't seem to have a plan that will solve this crisis, which is getting to be very serious, as I said. Protecting abortion, yes, I can understand the left has always done that, but protecting abortion until birth, that is new. Several states have adopted it. More states are adopting it, and of course the Congress says they're okay with that. And they went one step further in a bill that tried to protect live births, those that may be a botched abortion or a baby that's born alive. No, they could not come up with the votes to do that. They would not support a living child. This is what I'm saying, unhinged, radical stuff that we haven't seen in years, and it's all being unleashed at one time in Washington, D.C. The latest is a resolution they've kind of been forced into, which is very interesting, thanks to Congresswoman Ilhan Omar has made a lot of anti-Semitic comments. She's been very hard on Israel. She's been very loud and very proud about her heritage and that she doesn't like Israel, forcing the Congress or Nancy Pelosi to try to pass an anti-Semitic resolution. However, she's having a hard time getting the votes in her own caucus. That's right, having a hard time getting votes for an anti-Semitic resolution. I never thought I'd see those days, but we're seeing them. But before we go to the state issues, which are just about as unhinged and unleashed, let's talk about a couple of good news stories, or interesting news stories that are actually on kind of the good side. AOC, that famous little congresswoman from New York who's been really, really vocal, seems to have gone very quiet in the last week or two. Mainly because some interesting things were found out about her campaign. For one, $1 million seems to have gotten funneled somewhere that nobody can account for. Just poof, out of the air. Looks like it was funneled into some private funds of some sort. She was very vocal about saying that Uber was a horrible situation and that it was destroying the taxi service in New York City and probably should be banned. And then we find out her campaign used Uber over 500 times during the campaign and used taxis 7 times. She also, of course, in her Green Deal wants to eliminate airplanes, but she flew on a number of flights, short distance around New York, where she could have easily taken a train or another form of transportation. And last but not least, her office happens to be 800 feet from mass transit, which she says she totally supports mass transit. She used the car 90% of the time, not the transit. Haven't heard much from AOC, and we'll see what happens going forward. All right, another good news story coming out of D.C. for our farmers and ranchers here in Washington State. It looks like the wolves will be delisted. That is a major situation that's been fought here. I'm sure that Olympia will react to that. The folks in Seattle are just bound and determined to have wolves across the state, at least across the eastern part of the state. We certainly didn't get much reaction from introducing them in Magnolia, but the federal government has seen fit that there are 5,000 wolves now in the United States and a lot more than that in Canada to delist them. And no longer an endangered species would certainly let us control that population a little better here in Washington State. Well, back stateside in Olympia, the left is doing the same thing here they're doing in D.C., running their laundry list, and boy, is it a long laundry list. And the governor's absent on top of all this. He's out flying around in a private jet. Mr. Green Machine is flying his private jet all over doing some presidential campaigning, while the legislature is now on the floor voting out some very, very bad bills. Starting with a bill to overturn a Supreme Court decision, the Janus decision, which has rendered a lot of the unions a little light in the wallet, because the Janus decision allowed people not to pay into dues for political purposes that they didn't want to and still be a member of the union. This has reached kind of a critical situation for some of the unions, and they are fighting back by trying to pass a bill that will do an end around the Janus decision, forcing everyone to pay their dues if they're in the union without any say in it. And they tried this a couple years ago. They did try to do it for the home health care workers, and now they're trying to do it for a wider swath of folks. Even after hairdressers stormed the Capitol and said no to the independent contractor changes that the left wanted, the unions again were involved. They are still pushing for a change in the definition of independent contractors. They're very upset that some folks are independent, do not pay into some of their systems, and therefore want to end that practice in any way they can, get everybody back on the union train. Speaking of unions and taxes, the WEA is at it again. They're asking for more money for schools after we just put $8 billion in and settled the McCleary decision. They want even more. How are they going to get that? Well, the first bill you'll hear about is to raise the $1.50 limit on local levies. That's your property tax limit on local levies that was put in place by the McCleary decision. It was part of that decision, and it was important because the fact was, the reason for the entire decision was that the state was not paying their fair share and that local levies were being used as a backfill for state money. Therefore, we limited the levies to $1.50 and let the state pay the rest. Well, that doesn't seem to be satisfying the WEA, so they're asking to raise that levy. That means your property taxes will go back up. They're also pushing again. The capital gains tax is still on the table, an income tax by all measures, and also a B&O tax increase on service businesses, a 60% increase in the business tax on a lot of our small businesses in the state of Washington. I just don't see how that's a good idea or how it could even fly. And of course, we haven't even touched the carbon tax, which is alive and well, passed out of the Senate in the transportation package. That will raise the price of fuel about 21 cents a gallon. And if you include the 6-cent gas tax, it's also in that package. That is a 21-cent increase in the cost of fuel. And by the way, that's 95 cents a gallon is what it works out to. And when getting gas, like at this point, is at about $2 a gallon. Now that's before tax at $2 a gallon. That works out to a 48% sales tax, a 48% tax on fuel. If you're buying it at $2, that's a 48% surcharge, 95 cents a gallon. And don't forget that carbon tax adds 15 to 20% to the price of power also for everybody in the state of Washington. And if that wasn't enough, well, there's still a push to raise the 1% limit on property taxes in general. Now remember, the $1.50 lid is for school levies. That was put in place to keep a limit on local taxes. The 1% was done by Initiative 747 years ago and is held year after year. They've fought to take it off. They've fought to remove it. And this year may be the year with the votes they have in place to remove it. Are they going to go to 2% or 3%? No. The proposals so far are to go back to the original 6%. Can you imagine a 6% property tax increase every year, compounded over 5 or 10 years? What a great idea when housing prices are the biggest issue in housing in general is short of supply. Let's raise the price. Last but not least, the gun issue. Well, as you know, the debate over Initiative 1639 rages across the state, with the sheriff saying they won't necessarily enforce it, the attorney general saying they will. This battle has created some interesting potential lawsuits against the attorney general. We'll be talking more about in the next few weeks. But they are bound and determined to go even further with a limit on sales of assault weapons, supposedly assault weapons as they describe them, and on large magazines. That is still alive and moving through the process, even though 1639 is very much in question and is still in the courts. These folks just don't back off the throttle. So I guess with all that on the plate, I have to ask, do you feel you're being represented here? Really? I don't. I don't know who these people are representing. Raising taxes when revenues are at an all-time high, when things are tight enough out here for folks with the cost of housing, the cost of groceries and other things, and fuel now going up even more, and they just want to pour on more. Who are these people representing? I just don't know. It sure doesn't make any sense to me. All right, we're going to come back in a few minutes, see if we can get those legislators on the phone and talk a little bit more about what's going on in Olympia, because none of it looks good right now. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the 12th District. Well, it looks like you're stuck with me today. The legislators are on the floor. They are voting. It is going to be a couple of long days. This is the middle of the session when everything has moved out of committee and is now on the floor. And those lists can get very long, especially when they're running the volume of bills that they're running in Olympia right now. What they did do is send me a list of the bills they're most concerned about. These are bills that have made it out of committee and that are on the floor. Some of them reflect what we talked about in the last segment, but these are more specific as to actually what they do. I am going to read from their email precisely what they are concerned about and what the bill numbers are. House Bill 110 would create a new low-level carbon fuel standard similar to California's model. This program would add significantly to the price of gas, goods, and transportation, and it would not significantly improve anything in the environment. It does not create any funding for infrastructure or for transportation at this point. This is just mimicking the California fuel standards. Again, it will raise prices, very little difference in pollution, but will raise the cost of literally everything tied to fuel. Senate Bill 5116 would phase out fossil fuel electricity generation and move to 100% clean energy by 2045 and create penalty and incentive structures to move off of fossil fuel resources. This is kind of a carbon pricing system, it looks like to me. The cost of this plan will fall directly on families and employers through much higher energy bills, and it's called the Carbon-Free Washington Act. Again, this is similar to what California has been doing and it's questionable as to how much carbon it will actually reduce because Washington's already the cleanest provider of power in the United States. By the way, that bill, as I understand it, also wipes out natural gas. Now that is we do have natural gas plants here. We've eliminated the coal plant. It's being shut down and phased out over the next few years. So coal is not a factor here. But this also, as I understand it, attacks the coal plants outside the state, makes it so that we cannot purchase that lower price energy from out of state unless it comes from renewables, which means the price of that electricity will be significantly higher. Here's one for you. House Bill 1105. I hadn't heard this one. We talked about property taxes. Would impose a new property tax to pay for a government-sponsored hotline to help property owners facing foreclosure. Really? So we're going to increase the property tax on everybody that's paying their payments to help folks that maybe can't pay their payments. Seems to me that could be done without a property tax quite easily. House Bill 1590 would give councilmatic authority to local jurisdictions to raise sales tax and use tax for affordable housing and homelessness projects. Well, there you go. That will give councilmatic authority and jurisdictions to raise sales and use tax. Now, that is a new authority for local government. All right, House Bill 1515 in its initial form would change the criteria for independent contractors. We just talked about this in the last segment. To create, this bill actually has been amended to just create a work group, but that in turn will be used to push this policy in the future, trying to eliminate independent contractors. I know how many of you will be concerned about that one. House Bill 1491, which has been called restrictive scheduling. Oh boy, here we go. When the minimum wage was introduced in Seattle, there was a serious problem with cutbacks and scheduling and changing of hours, and it just shuffled things quite a bit. So they backed up that with a bill in Seattle that said you cannot change someone's hours or change their schedule within a 2-week period. So it's called predictive scheduling. It has met with some big resistance in Seattle, but it has penalties and changes things for anyone who changes scheduling. If you decide business is going to pick up or you have a snowstorm and you want to tell some people to go home, you're going to pay a significant penalty to those folks. You're actually going to pay them their wages, I believe. I haven't read the details, but that's how the Seattle one works. And if you add hours, if you say suddenly you need people for something, there is a rush, you'll have to pay them time and a half for coming in. House Bill 1575 would make it easier for unions to deduct union dues. We did talk about that one too. This is the end around on the Janus decision. This will significantly change the way unions collect funds back to the old way before the Janus decision freed people from that situation. All right, Senate Bill 5395 would require every public school to provide comprehensive sex education. We have talked about this from kindergarten all the way to 12th grade. This would be required. There is some talk about an amendment to do an opt-out, but required, and it also must include lots of information on choices when it comes to transgender, and of course telling kids that they still have a choice on whether they want to be a boy or a girl and all that. It's pretty convoluted, folks. It doesn't look real good on paper for those of us that don't think kindergartners are quite ready for that yet. And there's more. A couple of health care bills here, very interesting. One is House Bill 1523. I'm pretty sure this is going to pass. It would require the Washington Health Benefit Exchange to develop a standardized health plan and expressly limit choice over time in favor of a one-size-fits-all plan. You know where this is headed, don't you? This approach would result in providers leaving networks, leaving Washington state, and shifting health care costs to self-funded plans, would make health care far more expensive for people in Washington state and destabilize the marketplace. And folks, that's exactly what it's intended to do, because this is aimed at making our state a single-payer government health care system. And to top that off, House Bill 1870 would codify Obamacare in state statute. This would lock our state into a healthcare system that continues to struggle and has done nothing but increase costs. Senate Bill 5822 would direct the Healthcare Authority to convene a work group to study what? Yes, universal single-payer healthcare system for Washington state and develop a funding plan for such. House Bill 1068 would prohibit high-capacity firearm magazines over 15 rounds. That was amended. It was 10 rounds to start with. Now it's 15 rounds, but still another gun bill that won't change a thing. And last but not least, our favorite, Senate Bill 5693 is alive and well and moving through the system, which requires Washington farmers to report slaves. Really? You know where that came from, downtown Seattle. Well, there you go, a laundry list of the left primarily, and they're moving those agenda items. That tax situation particularly is not a good one for the folks here in Washington state. We have some of the highest state and local taxes already, and apparently they're going to go higher. This has forced 53% of the people in California to say they want to leave. That's the latest poll. 53% of Californians want to bail out. And the similar situation with a huge deficit in New York, where the folks that make the money are bailing out. Both those states, 1% of the public pays 48% of the burden. And these folks on the left talk about progressive tax structures. Well, ours is not that progressive, but it's not that regressive either. All right, there you have it. We'll come right back and wrap it up. Well, that's it for today, folks. The left unleashed or unhinged? Which one is it? Maybe both. We'll report. You decide. We'll be back next week, hopefully with your legislators. We'll find out what's happening and which one of these bills actually gets to the governor's desk or heads to the governor's desk. We'll see you then. This is Kerry Condata. This is the 12th District.